Hi, welcome to Head, Heart, and Hustle, the podcast for creatives. As always, I'm your host, Alan Plummer. Thanks for listening. And most importantly, welcome to Season 2. I've been busy at work through the early part of 2017, prepping up a number of episodes, and we're going to start off this season with Noah Scalin. Noah is an artist from my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. He is currently the artist in residence at the business school for Virginia Commonwealth University. It's a bit of a unique scenario. I don't think you find too many business schools that have an artist in residence. But one of the other things that's also really great about Noah is that he is somewhat famous for a project he did a little over 10 years ago. You may have heard of something called Skull-A-Day. And essentially what that meant was Noah decided to create a Skull-A-Day for a year. That's right, 365 skulls, 365 days. It opened up a number of wonderful doors for Noah. It is a project and an experiment that he is still reaping the benefits from. And when he and I chatted, I thought he would be the perfect person to start off Season 2. So let's dive in. Noah, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. One of the first things I like to do to start things off is have folks introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. So why don't we dive in there?
Sure. So my name is Noah. I am an artist, an activist, an author, and a space pirate.
And space pirate, which I can't forget. Slash space pirate slash artist. Yes, exactly.
Is that too brief? Should I go on?
No. As much or as little as you want to say. I think you've left enough intrigue there that we can dive into a lot of that.
Good.
So let's start about the space pirate, because I think that's one of the most. I did dig into your website and some of the stuff around that. I love it. Tell me a little bit about what that means.
So League of Space Pirates is my long form personal project that I've been working on since 2002. That's basically always been on the back burner because it's purely just something I do for the joy of making.
Right.
And it's a collectively done, collaborative art project that centers around the idea of creating a science fiction universe without there sort of being a core. Usually, the universes that we know are like Star Wars, when it starts with a movie, or Star Trek starts with a TV series, whereas this just starts as a universe and then everything builds out of it.
Okay.
And so it manifests in a variety of formats, most recently and sort of the sort of biggest, most accessible piece being a band that actually performs that's part of this storyline. And then that leads to a web show and comic book that's been in the works for a while, an art show that's coming up this fall that's going to be expanding the universe of the antagonist, which is this corporation that starts in Richmond, Virginia, and exists 500 years into the future. So we're going to present a factual history of this company from the 1880s to the present day. It's going to be their 130th anniversary, and so I have about 30. Yeah, it really. This is a rabbit hole.
This is one of your little side projects.
This is my side project. This is my fun project. So seriously, like 30 odd artists are going to be involved in creating ephemera that sort of show its history as originally a snake oil manufacturer, then a pharmaceutical, and then sort of delving into a variety of businesses like internet provider,
right,
cable TV, movies, all this stuff. So we're basically going to create all this history and share it with the public of Richmond as here's something you never knew about Richmond. There's
awesome.
a company, and all of it ties into this universe that exists up until 500 years from now, where this other storyline is taking place.
30 artists you've got working on this. That's massive. So
yeah.
So I hate to do the comparison, right? But so I'm from Richmond. Folks that listen kind of know that I'm from there as well. People may or may not know that Richmond is the hometown of Gwar, right? And I don't want to make comparisons there, but a big performing arts band. I had friends that worked on some of their costumes and their effects back in the late 80s and the 90s. It sounds a little, I don't want to say reminiscent, but it does sound somewhat in that vein.
Sure.
Did that subconsciously or consciously, you think, played a role in some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think both. I mean, the fact is, growing up in Richmond, Gwar is part of your life. I mean, as a kid in 80s, it's like there's this crazy thing that's happening here, and I think Richmond is unique in the way that it fosters that. So I think it's not a coincidence that I create a project here that is similarly expansive and complicated and crazy, because Richmond allows for that. It has the room for that. You can create space for that, right? I have a basement that I can build a spaceship in, and I've got tolerant neighbors who I can play loud music, and just sort of the ability to have that the room to do that. I lived in New York for a long time, and I couldn't do it there. I mean, there'd just be no way.
Right.
And so Guar similarly could never have existed. And we were definitely in the same vein. I mean, sonically we're different, and they're coming at it as starting as a band and then becoming all this other stuff. And we're starting as the storyline. The band sort of grows out of it. But absolutely props to them. I love them. I used to have dreams about Guar. I mean, that's like how much of a part of my life it was.
It was a rite of passage when you went to their first show. And I don't know about you, but you wore like a plain white T-shirt.
Of
and
course,
you came with the red blood stains and all the other stuff on it after the show.
I ended up remember going to a show with a friend of mine in like high school wearing a white Keith Haring shirt and just destroyed afterwards. And I went to the Third Street Diner, which was like one of the only 24-hour restaurants in Richmond other than Aunt Sarah's Pancake House. So went to Third Street Diner just covered in blood and gore, and my eyes were dyed red, which is something that happens when you're like right in the front row just getting blood dumped on you.
Right.
And me and my friend are sitting there just looking wiped out, and these two girls at the table next to us were just like, what happened to you? And we're like, oh, we were at a show. And they're like, are you okay? We're like, yeah, no, it's fine. It's fake blood.
It's not real.
It's not real. They were just like, okay.
Yeah. Right. So are you a musician in the band with you guys starting Pace Pirates?
Yeah.
Because you do a lot of things. I didn't know you played instruments too.
So my previous bands I played keyboard. Current band I'm a singer. So making my life a little bit easier, except that I own all the equipment, and so I end up still having to plug in all the equipment for the keyboard player and stuff. So yeah, on this band I'm just singing and writing the lyrics. Nice. I have other people doing the rest of it, but it's interesting because it's not like a typical band in that everybody comes together and you figure out what you do. It's really something that I've orchestrated, and I have these great people coming in and playing the parts of and playing these characters of, and we've rotated through the cast over the years, and it's a really fun way to get people. The way I think about this project is as a sandbox, and really saying to people here's a chance. If there's something you wish you were doing, this is a chance to do it. There's no money, but it'll be a lot of fun.
Right.
And this will give you that sort of impetus. So even with this art show, people are going, oh man, this is just what I need right now. I'm so stuck with whatever I'm doing for my commercial work or for my professional work, because it doesn't matter. And there's this sort of these parameters that then get you excited, because you're like, oh yeah, what would it be like if there was a fast food restaurant that's that was inspired by this company? And so it's great because I see all these wheels turning and people getting really excited, and that's definitely what it's meant for. If one day it makes money, I'd be loved to pay everybody. But in the meantime, if this can at least inspire people to make things that they wouldn't have made otherwise, that they've always wished they would make, then it's successful.
See, and now you're speaking my language. That's exactly it. it. I don't know if I said to you, I started this podcast because I was having conversations with a lot of my friends who were creatives, and we'd get together and we'd chat and we'd trade notes, and I'd come out feeling really, really energized. But as a writer and kind of doing stuff on a solo piece, I found it really hard to keep that momentum going. Especially kind of, being detached from a lot of people and being out where I am and having a family. And so part of it was just kind of, let me bottle that lightning. Let me have some of these really good conversations and capture them. I think it's awesome that you guys are able to kind of build that, to your word, that sandbox and kind of be able to capture a lot of that. That's just killer. I love it.
Thanks. Yeah.
Now, you grew up in an artistic household. One of the things I like to ask people about is kind of what their childhood was like and how they became a creative person. It seems to me, based on what I know about you, you grew up in an artistic household, and you certainly came by it honestly. Is that fair?
Yeah, I have no choice but to be an artist. So both my parents are artists. And I have one sister, and she's an artist as well. And yeah, I mean, we basically grew up using, professional art materials from day one. I always joke that I would do these intricate drawings as a little kid with permanent markers and just huffing that, chemical smell for hours.
Yeah.
Just no qualms about my parents being like, that's what you get to use is these permanent markers. But, and their studio was our playroom. We just made art as a family. And it was amazing because I didn't really know that wasn't what everybody did. And of course they were totally encouraging of my sister and I to go to school for art. I did theater. I ended up in theater design, the technical side of theater. My sister ended up in photography. Mm-hmm. There was no point at which they were like, well, you better think about a career. We were both like, we better think about careers.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, whatever, you get an art degree and you teach, because they both ended up teaching. at VCU, the university here in the city. And so I grew up in like going to art school, basically, like going to their classes. I ended up like making projects for my dad's class and grading his students' projects when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
He actually had an illustration class where he'd bring in my work as samples and be like, at that time, it was like, a high school student did this, so you better do better than this. So they all
No
hated
pressure.
me. Yeah. So, but it was like, that's what I was used to. It was like, there were these great, I'd see these cool projects that they would like, these kids would take over the rooms and like do interesting stuff. And that was like, so all of that was my upbringing. And then I went to school and was like, how do I get a job?
Right.
Because they were both teachers and I didn't want to be a teacher. Like I was at the time, I just was like, that's not the career path I want to go on.
Yeah.
And
totally
so I didn't really know what you could do. And so I was like, well, I'd started volunteering in high school. So I went to Open High, which is an alternative high school here.
Yep.
And the thing about Open was that it kind of was like college. You pieced your classes together from a catalog, and there's a certain amount of service hours you need to do with volunteering. So I ended up volunteering at Theater 4. Now this is different theater here, but it was this long-term Richmond theater, and so I would be like going to school during the day and that night like doing run crew, like follow the spot operator on plays like every night. Like that's what I was out late doing was working on plays. So I kind of like in the process of doing that, like building sets and props with them, was like, maybe that's a job. Like, you can be creative and get paid for it. So I was like, I'll go to theater school.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because I actually grew up performing, singing, and I was one of those kids that got put on stage before they were old enough to have stage fright. So that matched that with having a fairly decent voice, not gifted, but a fairly decent voice. And, being pretty outgoing. I just leaned towards kind of performing at a young age. Eventually, I got to the point in college where I said, you know what, like you said with teaching, I was like, I'm not sure that I'm going to make a living as a performer, and I'm not sure that I want to do that, and I'm not sure I want to teach, which is kind of where I pivoted and picked up kind of the writing thing, because I had always been writing on the side, and I'd always kind of been storytelling and creating things in my head and everything, and then shifted over. But that said, so let me ask real quick. So one of the things I like to ask people about, I have a 6-year-old. He's extremely artistic. He's very much a visual artist. So he's got that artist mentality that I can see immediately, right? He gets that idea in his head, and he's got to have pen and paper. He's got to have his crayons. He's got to have his markers, and he's got to get it out right then, right? So I can see it. I can recognize it. It's almost kind of manic at times, right? And it's wonderful to watch him because, right, in the Malcolm Gladwell sense, he's already putting in his 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He'll draw the same thing 5 or 6 times in 20 minutes, and each time he's focusing on a little area detail. And, as a dad, I'm like, go, man, go, 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 go. But I'm also struggling a little bit because I grew up in a household where my creativity was supported, but maybe not encouraged. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I always like to ask folks kind of what they think about in terms of raising creative kids, or what advice you have from your childhood, especially with your parents, that really helped you as you evolved as an artist.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because I have a 4-year-old, and so I'm sort of going through this right now as well, of like sort of watching how she's doing things, and also sort of being like, I'm going to give her the best environment, right? Because I like, I can do that. And my parents, their whole thing was sort of like, other than hurting yourself, there's no real rules when it comes to art. Like, just go for it, and be careful with this X-Acto knife, It was pretty open-ended, and that was great. But I also don't really know what age I was when a lot of that was happening. Like, I think in my head, I think 6, is probably like a solid age for that. But like 4 and 3, I think I was expecting her to be doing all this stuff a lot younger, which she was. I mean, my daughter's definitely like, doing anything and everything. But at the same time, it's been interesting because, so to jump ahead a little, I do all this corporate teaching around innovation and creativity. And so I'm always advocating for people to be like that they're creative, it's within them, and that you can do it. And it's easy. You just have to learn a few little things to sort of get over stuff that you've been trained throughout your life to sort of suppress. And so it's been interesting to watch my daughter, because I was really shocked to discover how early she got like this frustration about perfectionism, because I kind of thought that would come later, and she's like, since 2 has been like just miserably frustrated that she can't make things exactly right the first time she makes it. I'm like, you've never drawn this before.
My son
Why
does
do you
that.
think you could do it right the first time? And then she's like, I can't do it. You do it for me. I'm like, no, you do it. And then I'm like confused, because I'm like, well, does she need to see somebody draw it so she understands a way to draw? Because I wanted her to draw it her way, but then she's just like, how do you draw a nose? And I'm like, I know, they're hard to draw. Like, just try and make a nose. Make your nose. She's like, no, you guys are good at drawing it. I can see you're a good nose drawer, so draw it for me. And I'm like, no. And so it's like this weird feeling of like, am I what's
Oh,
the right
guys,
way to encourage her?
you
Because I'm
just
sure, like,
you
if
just validated my existence as a parent.
did
It's
I,
the same thing. I swear to God, my 6-year-old's the same way. He will throw him, and he's so dramatic too. That's the other piece. He could be a performer.
oh yeah,
He
oh
throws himself on the floor. Oh, I'll never get it right. I can't do it. It's ruined. And he just, it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
dialing up to 11.
yeah.
And it amazes me because I think what I realize is, it's like a lot of artists. He's got this concept in his mind's eye or in his head, and when it
Right.
doesn't come out on paper like that, man, does he get frustrated?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know.
we all do, right? And
Right.
I guess obviously at some point you figure out that, like, oh, if I practice something, I'll get better at it.
Yes.
And look, I know I have this too. I'm a perfectionist, and I'm also somebody who's like, if I don't really sort of do it pretty good the first time, I probably am not going to try again. And I'm pretty lucky because a lot of times I can knock stuff out pretty well the first time with
Right.
visual skills, and it's like, it comes easy to me or whatever. But then it's like, then you're lazy, and that's not good. And so it's really interesting navigating that with her, and then also navigating that with adults who basically are like, I don't have a creative bone in my body, which is like this thing I hate hearing.
Yes.
And I'm always
Yes.
like arguing about that, what does that mean, and sort of how do you teach this stuff. So yeah, it's a great lesson for me. And I've been doing like fun experiments with my daughter where one of the things my company does, and I feel like we're jumping around a little bit, but is
That's great.
we teach this thing. We do this program called Creative Sprint, and it's basically publicly, it's a free 30-day program where we're like, hey, try doing a little creative task every day for 30 days. We'll email you. And now we have a book out that's the same concept. It's like 6 30-day sprints. And the idea being like 30 days builds a habit, right? And you're talking about the concept of the 10,000 hours. And basically this idea that, like, you just have to get started and do stuff, and you really can't be precious about it. And you really just got to make anything at all. And we have a little system that's like, it's not only just making, but it's making and then sharing and then reflecting on it. So we have a little system around it. But when we started doing these, this all came out of this practice I had done myself right now, 10 years ago, where I did a Skull-A-Day for a year. And when I did that, I was like, I learned all this amazing stuff, and I did all these books, and all this stuff happened. And so we decided we'd start with my sister, who's my business partner. We decided we would do this creative sprint concept. And so the first time we run it, she's like, oh, and we're going to do it as well. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I don't, I'm already the guy who does that. I know how to do it. Right. I learned everything to know.
Right.
But no, we got to do it. It's going to look good, and I'll help promote it. Okay, yeah. So I do it. And of course, I get all this stuff out of it. And it's amazing. And I'm like, oh, I'm so dumb. Like, of course, this works. I tell other people it works. It works for me too.
Yeah.
So then I'd done it, like, we did it 4 times. So it's like, first 2 times I did a couple things myself. So the third time I'm like, all right, I'm going to get my daughter involved. And basically was like, I'll involve her somehow every day, which as a parent, like at that time, a 3-year-old, like 3-year-olds do not collaborate well. Right. Like, so I like set myself up, but it was a great lesson. And I did it again this past April. So she was already 4, but just turned 4. So like twice now I've done it with her, and twice I've been like pulling my hair frustrated, but at the same time learning really, really good lessons about what it does take to collaborate, but also how to let go of a lot of stuff that I carry with me around perfectionism and around, the expectation of certain results, and what, it's great. It's a great learning experience to work with your kids.
And patience, yes.
And patience, and like to be like, you know what, I have lessons to learn. Like, as much as obviously they're learning all the time you're teaching them, they teach you great lessons.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, as I've gotten older too, as I do all stuff like that with my son, it carries over for me in the workspace, because now as I lead creatives and I'm leading creative teams and I've got people reporting to me, there's a lot of lessons around coaching and kind of exemplifying some of those traits and being a positive reinforcement and stuff. So
totally, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Skull-A-Day for a minute. I was hesitant to kind of bring that up. I think that's certainly, kind of was a huge kind of boon for your career. I was talking to my wife about the interview and was prepping and stuff, and I chuckled. I was like, Sarah, he's the first person I've interviewed that actually has earned their own Wikipedia page. I was impressed. I was like, that's pretty awesome.
It's not that hard.
It's not that hard. Well, no, it's cool though. And then so I was familiar with Skull-A-Day and everything. And I told my wife that, and she was like, oh, that guy? She was like, he's from Richmond? I was like, yeah. So, let's explain a little bit of what Skull-A-Day is in case somebody doesn't know or folks don't know. And then I want to delve into it a little bit, kind of about that experience for you and where it came from and what you got out of that.
Sure. Yeah. So Skull-A-Day was basically my sort of means of getting myself out of a creative rut. So sort of to complete the story that I started before, I'd gone to theater school to do theater design. Interestingly, I actually was more of an introvert. I was sort of on the borderline introvert extrovert, but I was more of an introvert. So I basically was like, I don't want to be a performer. I'm going to be behind the scenes making things. And then as I got out of school, I was like, oh, I'll be a graphic designer. because that was something I'd started dabbling in school, and I enjoyed it, and I liked the sort of ability to make something creatively and have it exist and not have to like worry about like the sort of minuscule budgets and time constraints of theater.
Right.
And so I got into graphic design, really enjoyed that. Did it for 6 years working for other people, and then started my own company. And then I did that for another 6 years. And then I was just done. And it was like, I'm like totally stagnating. I'm not getting better work. I'm not doing more interesting work. It became a loop of like, I've already solved all these problems and I'm not interested in any, it's like, oh, this isn't good because I don't have anywhere to go from here. And I learned a big lesson from a friend of mine who was like, you haven't made any other goals for yourself. You set your goal as starting a business. And I was like, yeah, I did it. I started a business. And then like, I never made another goal. And it was a huge one for me to learn.
I had the same thing as a journalist, and I apologize, but
one
of the things that was funny was like, so when I moved to New York, I wanted to become a professional writer. That was the goal, right? And so like I said to you before, I had been writing novels and I had written plays and everything else, and I was trying to make connections in New York and get stuff put on stage. But in the meantime, I was freelancing, and I was writing clips and things and writing for friends of mine who were editors at magazines and bailing them out and stuff. And that led to like my first kind of professional writing gig. And then as I started to do that, I said, well, I want to write for magazines, and I want to write books, and I want to ghostwrite stuff, and I want to get published by here and there and everything. And that started to unfold for me. And I had a list of certain things that I wanted to do. And just like you, over the course of about 9 years, I was able to kind of check a lot of those things off. And then it's the job and the work started being fun and creative, and it felt like work. And I wasn't learning and I wasn't growing. And what I realized at the end of that, right around 2001, was that what motivated me was that desire to grow and to be challenged and to learn. And as soon as I stopped getting those opportunities, it got really stale really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is I had kind of created my career around this idea of I want to be creative for a living, because I couldn't sort of see my way to like making art for a living. And then I kind of forgot that. And so I ended up like just doing a job. And I was like, wait a minute. Like the whole reason I got into this was to be creative. And now I'm not enjoying it anymore and I'm not making work I like. So I can't just do something to make money. Like that just doesn't work for me. And I was just like, oh, so in this sort of period of being really frustrated and stuck and sort of not knowing what to do about it, I had this epiphany, and it was really random. I mean, I always tell the story, but it's truly this way, is that I was walking through a park here in Richmond called Maymont Park, which I'm sure you know.
Yep.
And like it was on my birthday, and I was like, all of a sudden this idea popped in my head. I should make a skull every day for a year. And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I was like, it's a ridiculous idea, but I was like, okay. And so I didn't actually do it. The first day I just was like, huh. And then the next day I didn't do it. And then so the day after that, so my birthday was on June 2nd. So then June 4th, I was like, that crazy idea. I need to do this, because I was like, I just need to make something for myself. I don't make art unless somebody asks me to, and I'm never making my own stuff, and nobody's hiring me to do anything interesting. I'll just make it.
Right.
And at that time, this was 2007, so it's actually 10th anniversary right now. I was like, I'll just do this thing. And skulls weren't really popular. I just liked them.
Right.
So I did it, and then blogging was really big then. So I made a blog on Blogger and just put it up and was like, okay, I'm doing this. And then like 2 days in, I told my friends about it. And they were like, okay, cool.
Well, now I'm on the hook. People know about it.
Yeah. I was like, okay, now they'll actually force me to keep going. And then 10 days in, it went viral. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. Because I had been putting in like 20 minutes a day into this thing.
Right.
And then it got picked up by all this press, and all these people were checking it out, and people were going. And so it got really, really big, really fast. Thousands and thousands of people checking in, commenting, like sharing, like all this stuff happened. It was great, but it was terrifying because suddenly I was like, oh, I better do a good job. Because I was trying to do good work, but it wasn't like, spend a little bit of time. Suddenly I'm like spending more and more time on it. And it's not, I still have a job. I'm still working full time. So, I'm like getting up an hour earlier in the morning, trying to do it before work, or then spending all night doing it after work. Luckily at the time I didn't have a kid yet, because I can't even imagine it now. But but yeah, so I spent all this time, and so it just grew and grew and grew. And then like I got a book deal partway into it, and that led to actually some income, which allowed me to focus on it a little more. And then opportunities just kept coming from that. It was just crazy. It was these things where it was like, right, just do a thing, anything, often enough, things happen. I mean, it was just, and then so I kind of, after it happened, I ended up doing this art show here in Richmond, and that led to some folks here locally who work with corporations around creativity they introduced me to their clients. Their clients said, "We love what you do. Come back and talk to us more."
Right.
And so I had this side gig while I was still being a graphic designer, where I was going teaching corporate creativity innovation classes. And then at a certain point, my sister was like, "There's a business here that you could develop. Can I develop it for you?" I was like, "Yeah, sure," because I'm kind of done with this graphic design thing anyway. And so I just sort of like slowly faded my clients away and like transformed them into like art commission clients instead of graphic design clients. And it was this sort of process I've been in over the last basically 9 years since the project ended, that I just like slowly shifting towards this thing that I actually super enjoy and never imagined I'd be doing. And I get to spend more time making art, and then I get paid by these people who I would never have worked for as a graphic designer. It's really, the whole thing is so bizarre. I mean, there was many times where I'm in these like corporate headquarters, like telling the people I'm talking to, like, I know you think I just like walked in off the street, but like I actually am supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Because like these are like high-powered corporate executives, and I've got like knuckle tattoos. I mean, I'm just not, and earrings. Like, I'm just not from this world at all. I've always been in an art world. I've never been in the business world.
Right.
Even when I had like business jobs, I was always like the weirdo freak there. Like I had a job once where there was a dress code and it didn't apply to the art department, which was 2 people. And so I would come in with these like punk pants with like patches all over them, like hardcore patches, and like neon orange hair, and they're just like, "Oh, that's just Noah, it's fine, it's okay."
He's eccentric.
He's an art, he's a creative.
He's
they
an
can do
artist.
Right, yeah,
right.
because I could literally get away with that, and like, so I've never really gotten the like formal corporate experience.
Yeah, well, you're not missing anything.
No, and I talk to people who are in that, who are like, "We're just ground down," and not all of them. I have some great clients where they're like, "No, these are exciting, enthusiastic environments," but I've got some that are like, "This is, just misery," and I'm like, "Whoa."
You know what? It's funny. The happiest people I know, right? Because I work with creatives in a corporate environment. The happiest artists I know in a corporate environment have side hustles or passion projects, and that's where they kind of, because they can go in and put in their work during the day, and not feel like that's a sense of their identity, but they can do good work. And then when they come home, like, it's like the guardrails go off, and whatever they're doing, that's what they throw themselves into. And they figured out how to balance those two. You know what I mean?
It's really important, because I think what I was doing was putting it all into my work, because I ran my own business.
Right.
And so business was my work, was my art, was my business. And yeah, when you don't have that side thing, you hold that stuff up to be, it's like too important then. And like, yeah, if your work can just be your work, you'll do a good job. But like, you can know, hey, but I don't have to put every ounce of my love in it, because I can put that into this other thing that I own and that I'm excited about, and no client dictates.
And no money's tied to it, right?
Yeah,
so like
exactly.
this podcast, I don't have to worry about cash on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So let me ask you a real quick question. So when you did Skull-A-Day, one of the things I like to ask folks is kind of like biggest lessons that they learned. What was one of the biggest ahas or lessons you got out of that year in that project?
So, I mean, I've actually codified this stuff because I teach it.
Am I asking for trade secrets?
No, not at all. It's more like I'm just like, I feel like I'll sort of fall into this sort of formal dialogue here. But like, there's like 7 sort of big ideas that sort of are what I teach around that project. And a lot of times I come in and I teach one of those sort of introductory workshops I do, is I give a story about Skull-A-Day, and I teach these sort of big principles, and then I break them down, and then we dive into some specific ones. Right. So I'm trying to think like which one even to like sort of get to, because I think, so I'll just give you a little background on this. What happened is, so I finished the project, I get this opportunity to start talking to people, I get asked, come do this like corporate, conference talk. And so I was like, oh, what do I do? So having already sort of been contextualized a little bit by these folks who were working in this environment, I wrote down like 10 big ideas and sort of shared them in this thing. And then I sort of winnowed them down and focused in on them. So it was like after I was done with my project is when I really learned the lessons that I learned doing it. Because when I was doing it, I was just head down, just going as fast as I can, getting through it, because it was really super hard. I mean, I encourage everyone to do daily projects, and I have books about doing daily creative projects. Mm-hmm. But realistically, like what I was doing which was like a new idea every day. I was trying to top myself, and I was trying to do something like never repeat myself, or if I repeated a material technique, it had to be done differently. And so it just kept growing and growing. It was exhausting, and I got to the end of that year, and I was like so happy to be done. And like people like, you're gonna do this again? I'm like, I'm never doing it again. Like I'll never, that not because I didn't get anything from it, but I got so much from it that here I am 10 years later still reaping the benefits of it. But like, whoo, It's a lot. And so, yeah. And so really these principles sort of I came up with afterwards when I kind of looked back and was like, oh, and then as I started teaching and talking to people and realizing all these other sort of depth that was there.
Right.
One of the ones I think is really important and I was really surprised by was this idea about the value of limitations. I think especially in the creative world, like I was complaining all the time that like the reason I wasn't doing that good work, that like great work that I wish I was doing, was the client's fault, and it was because they weren't paying me enough, or because they didn't give me enough time,
Right.
or because they were too restrictive about the brief, whatever it was. And the reality was when I had this project where I had no time and no money and like even the freedom to decide on the subject matter because it was already decided.
Right.
Like I actually was my most creative and innovative, and I made the most interesting work of my career. And I was like, this is really interesting, right? That like I forgot that what inspires us is pushing against barriers.
Yeah.
And that the blank page is horrifying because there isn't something there to work against. That's the problem. That's why people have writer's block. It's not because they're not creative. It's because there's nothing to push against, right? You have the freedom to make anything you want. What the heck are you going to do? And so with this project, like I learned this lesson that I then immediately started applying to my clients and to everything I did my own art afterwards, which was like, if I don't feel like I've got an idea, I need more restrictions, not less. So I'm going to start putting up more barriers. Like one of the first things I did after the project was I got a gallery, gave me space and was like, do whatever you want. Oh, that's awesome. What am I going to do? So I was like, okay, it's definitely going to be a skull because I've been doing skulls.
If I don't do skulls, they'll be disappointed.
Right. So that'll limit me there. And then it was like, okay, I'll pick a singular material to work with because I really like working with everyday materials. So I was like, what can I get cheap and or free in large quantity to fill up this huge room? And so I thought of videotapes. Everybody had them. Nobody really cared about them. So I was like hundreds and hundreds of videotapes I collected just from friends. I don't think I bought a single one. And then brought them to the space and was like, now what am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to make a skull. But I was like, oh, I'm going to make it in perspective because I've been playing with that in the project, and that'll like fill the room in this really nice way. So all of this like limitations I set ended up making this really exciting piece that got me a lot of attention and then stepped me down on another path of creating these large format, large scale anamorphic installations using everyday materials that are then recycled afterwards. And so like right there. And then again and again, I employ that tactic to get me to new places.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm familiar with some of your larger scale stuff, some of the Anatomy of War stuff that you've done. I know that's not what you're talking about, but some of that stuff I just love.
Thanks.
I just freaking love it. Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really interesting as well, and this is a bit of a subtext, and I don't know if you've touched on this before, but when you talk about Skull-A-Day and when I start to read about it and everything, I hear, and you kind of echoed this too, about kind of, the expectations get there and you start putting in more and more time. And I've seen a lot of these, and, I know some of these, I guess by your own admission, at times could have taken like 2 hours, 4 hours, like sizable chunks of time. And it's amazing because at the end of the day, right, it's really nice. People can compartmentalize it really quickly and say, here's 365 pieces of art that all have skulls that this guy did over the course of a year. But if we did the math and broke it down, right, how many hours you spent and how much hard work and sweat and energy went into that, it's pretty freaking amazing. And that you've been talking about that, and I'm sure when you're doing a lot of these sessions and working with people, you emphasize that. But I feel like, at least for me, a lot of times we overlook that when we talk about art and we talk about kind of the hard work and the passion that goes into that stuff. I think as a culture, we tend to focus on the outcomes so much that we do a lot of younger artists a disservice, because I don't think we necessarily talk about the hard work and the passion and the effort that goes in behind the scenes on that kind of stuff. And so when I look at a lot of the stuff that you did and some of the things during that period, I'm like, God, I can't even imagine the work that went into that and the time and the energy and everything. But it's interesting because I feel like I hear that a lot of times with artists who reach a certain level of success is that tends to get taken for granted or just overlooked.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's all about the process. And I think that's the thing about the project in the end. Like, there's a great body of work, and some of those pieces are really good, and some of them stand on their own. But really, it was about going through a process, right? And then recognizing that process is what's valuable throughout my career, is that you have to pay attention to it. And when I'm in these corporate settings, yeah, they're so product focused, so end focused. And I'm always saying, you guys want new outcome, but you're not changing the way you're doing this process, and that's where you have to look at this. But yeah, because it's generally invisible, and it's not accounted for, and yeah, absolutely. Again, to go back to that 10,000 hour concept, which obviously that number isn't really accurate, but the idea of it is true, which is that people. What happens, I think, is that we sort of experience the seeing somebody suddenly become successful, and we never saw the work. And so there's this sort of idea, especially in America, I think, around instantaneous success, wealth, fame. And so when that happens, like, you start to think, well, that's how it happens. And even those people that just turned up have putting a lot of work and effort into that. These child stars that turn up, they're like, oh, they just got found. They're like, no, they were cultivating that. They wanted that, and their parents helped them do that, and they've been doing it for a long time, building to this moment that then you finally see them because they've crested above the sort of the water there. And so yeah, you've just encountered them, but that doesn't mean they didn't do all this work. And so I'm always trying to be honest with people that this stuff is a lot of work, but that work is valuable, and you get exponentially more than what you put into it. Like the more I've interviewed almost 1,000 people who've done daily projects of varying lengths, and just brief interviews, but just cataloging them. And what they're saying is the same thing. But what I see is that the more they put into it, the more they got out of it. So people that did 10 minutes a day, they still got a lot out of it, more than 10 minutes worth. But people like me who are putting hours and hours and hours, and we're getting amazing stuff back. And I know several people who've done these projects that just, like me, were just completely career-changing, life-changing experiences because of the effort that we put into them. And the other thing is, I will say, I started with 20 minutes. I didn't start with hours and hours. And I wouldn't recommend starting with hours and hours, because that would just kill you. The willingness to spend hours is because I saw the benefit of putting 20 minutes in, and then I put 40 minutes in, and over time, and then 50, and then an hour, and then 2 hours, and 3 hours, and 4 hours. And then there were days where I put 10, 15 hours in, and I didn't mind that because I knew what I was getting for it. And so I really emphasize this idea of starting small and making these really low hurdles to start things like this. And what you want is this flywheel effect, which I don't know if you ever read the book Good to Great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the only good, maybe not the only good, but one of the very few really good business books, because it's all data driven. It's not just anecdotal stories of somebody who's successful, which is problematic, right? Because the non-successful people, might have used the same tactics, but you don't hear from them. I just read something recently that was kind of frustrating me about that. So just sort of thinking about this idea of here's these success stories and here's what they did. And you're like, yeah, but it doesn't mean just because you want it. There's plenty of people who don't get first place who want first place, right?
There's no books of failure stories.
Yeah, it just and the fact is that there's plenty of people who want it too, and it doesn't mean they didn't want it hard enough. It's that there's a variety of other factors involved. What was my point, though?
Oh, you're talking about Good to Great. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just that Good to Great, they catalog sort of several things that help you go from a good project to a good business to a great business. And one of them is this idea of sort of just knuckle down, again, I say, sort of am I using the right term there? I guess I'm, this idea of head down, sort of the hedgehog principle, just sort of going straight forward towards one thing nonstop. And then the flywheel effect is that you keep doing stuff, and eventually it catches and it starts generating momentum, and it builds and builds. And maybe I'm paraphrasing it wrong, but that's how I remember it.
Right.
And so this idea is really true. If you start moving, stuff happens, and then you can sort of glom onto that stuff. And I've been toying with in some of my recent talks talking about physics, because there's sort of the Newton's laws that everybody learns in school. This idea of a body in motion tends to stay in motion, a body at rest to stay at rest. But it's it works for this too, right? Because it's really hard to get started on projects. I'm the worst procrastinator, and if you can do something little that has no seeming value as your first step, you don't mind that first step, and then you're already moving before you realize it. And then once you're moving, it's easier to do something a little more challenging and build it and build it, build it.
Right. Do you think part of that ability to get started is harder now with the internet and phones and kind of technology? And I mean, we've always had procrastination, we've always had distraction, but I feel like it's at a whole different level now than it was 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of torn on it because I see sort of both sides, right? Because these fidget spinners that are hugely popular right now. I was I want to know what they're like, so I bought one because I was I want to experience.
Oh, I have one on my desk. I'll admit it.
And I was you know what? It's super fun. I actually totally enjoy spinning that thing.
Yeah.
But I was but people are complaining about it. I was really, you're complaining? This is a physical object. Right. It's not a computer. It's not a phone. Think about how everybody's just. I was I don't know. So there's a little bit of do you want to be the crotchety person who's like, the internet ruins whatever. And I do feel like, yes, people sitting there like doing Candy Crush forever is just
Yeah.
wasting their lives, and people who are building amazing, incredible things in Minecraft, and you're like, that didn't exist in the real world though. Like you could have
Right.
cured some disease with all your effort, but you're
But
making in virtual nothing. Like,
yeah.
and so it's frustrating, but it's hard to say if like,
I also think, honestly, like I think as an artist and a creative individual, I think that gives younger folks so much more of an opportunity to share. So like you talked about
right?
Blogger, right, and getting the blog started. So there's kind of an impetus of that. But think about like people making YouTube videos and essentially, right? So as a writer and as a former journalist, I mean, essentially mass media is dying off, right? It's not dead, but we're headed in that
Oh yeah.
direction, right? Success is very different now. You can be successful with a niche audience that you couldn't have had a couple decades ago, and I think if you're passionate and you're hungry and you're still going to create, man, you don't need permission anymore. Like as
No,
a writer, I look at it and I'm like, I don't need a book deal anymore. I mean, and God, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I think it's awesome. You've got 6 books
yeah.
under your belt. I think that's great. But my point is like it changes the game a little bit if you're willing to do the hard work and, to your point, willing to kind of think of yourself like a business and do what you need to do to kind of put the energy in behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in a huge period of transition. I mean, I think what's hard to remember is that the internet is really young, right? I mean, like I
Right.
built a website, the first website for a company that I was working for in 1996.
Yeah.
And that they were using AOL still as their email, and like their address was like http:// like in print that way.
Yes, right.
And they got like it got reviewed in Entertainment Weekly. Like it was
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like that was the relative recent past. This isn't like, Gutenberg Bible here, like
Right.
think about like print or recorded music, and like we just don't even know what this thing is yet.
Yeah.
And on one hand, like it's really new. We're just figuring out. You're right. Like the old ways are dying off, and we're stuck right now in this weird middle ground where there's these huge industries that were developed and they're still around, and so they still are trying to be the gatekeepers. But on the other hand, like anybody can put a YouTube up, anybody can go on Instagram. I mean, that's the thing. I did a blog because that's what we were doing, but now you could Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever immediately.
Right.
But on the other hand, like those guys become this weird, like gatekeepers of information of their own. Like Facebook has really made it difficult to share things because of the way they've controlled things through algorithms. Whereas owning my blog, that blog is still mine. I can still, I mean, yeah, it belongs to, Google somewhere down the line. But in the end, like it's my space that I control. And it doesn't have an algorithm attached to it. Like, but nobody reads blogs anymore. So it's like,
Right.
I feel like hopefully we'll sort of shift at some point back again when people realize that they've kind of given up their autonomy for the sake of some of this stuff that's happening now.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's like there's this parable about like sort of like this. I think it's a Zen parable about this farmer and his son getting injured, and sort of the whole thing is like that people are like, oh no, that's terrible, and he's like maybe, and then the farmer, like then the people come to draft him, but he's injured so he can't go to war, and the guy's like, oh, how lucky of your son. He's like maybe, this idea that like we can't, it's so complicated. And I feel like, on the one hand, anybody can put anything out in the world, which is great. But now there's a million things. Like you and I, we could probably talk about pop culture from our childhoods forever because we saw the same things.
Correct.
But today, I can't talk to anybody because I have no idea what you've seen. I mean, there is some stuff that still everybody seems to have seen, but there's a lot of it, that I just, at this point, I'm never going to encounter because it's so broad.
Yeah.
And that's not bad. It's just different. And
it's funny because the way I think about it, so you talked a little bit about kind of that ability to create and kind of, I think of it as kind of being spiritual. You described it another way, but I think what happens is a lot of us have shifted so much towards consumption, and I don't mean consumption in kind of the monetary sense of going out and buying stuff.
No, I know
but
what you
it's
mean.
so easy to consume media, whether it's music or writing or internet or anything else, that I think a lot of us kind of get out of whack, right? And so for me, and I'm sure this is probably true for you as well, if you go for so long and you don't create something, if you don't create anything, then it impacts you. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's a spiritual element to it. Right. So a lot of people, you've got to work out to a certain extent because it helps me with stress and everything else. And there's a lot of people like that. I'm a firm believer that if you don't create on some level, then you're whether it's spiritual or mental or whatever, that gets out of whack.
I know you're saying something that I think about and say frequently, which is that if I'm not making more than I'm consuming or equivalent to what I'm consuming,
Yes.
then I'm feel ill. Like it makes me sick. And I will fall into those states where you just watch shows and you're like, how did they get a show? It's so good. Or how did they get that book? How did that guy get published? How did they get to be a TED Talk?
Right.
And you just start watching, and then you just spiral down. And then when you're not making, there's no reason for anybody to give you any opportunities because you're not producing anything. And like the great thing about this medium right now is that you can make something, put it out there immediately, and have opportunities happen because of it. But you have to make something and put it out there. It doesn't happen because you sit around waiting for it or consuming other stuff.
No one comes and anoints you and says it's your
Yeah,
time. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the problem is that right now it is infinite, and so you could spend all your time, just consuming everything and trying to keep up with everything. It's weird right now. I'm sort of put myself on a more restricted media diet because of the recent election, and I just really can't deal with like anything. And so I kind of shut down and went a little more internal and was like, I really need to focus on making. And so I feel a little more out of the loop. Like I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be.
Yeah.
Not that I was ever much, but I've really now purely marketing.
I quit it cold turkey for 18 months. It was one of the smartest things I ever did.
Yeah, it's healthy.
I run a social media team for a living. So I'll say full disclosure, right? I have a Facebook presence. One day I just realized I was like, I'm deleting it off the phone. I'm keeping the account open. I rarely use my laptop at home outside of work.
Yeah.
And 1 month turned into 2, and I was like, let me see how long I can stretch this, right? Went on for 18 months, never missed it. I gained 45 minutes back a day.
Wow.
It was insane.
And that's valuable time.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I say, because people are always like, well, I don't have time to do this creative thing or make a thing. And when we're doing creative sprint stuff, we're advocating like 5 minutes a day.
Right.
But the fact is you've got up to 45 minutes a day or more that you could be using to make a thing, and that thing could be taking you somewhere.
Yeah.
And it doesn't guarantee you success, but it does guarantee that you'll feel better about yourself for having made something. And then you've built steps that lead places. Like when I look at my skulls, and right now I'm reposting the first 30 and sharing them on these platforms that people haven't necessarily seen them on before.
Right.
And I'm saying like, here's the little lessons. But one of the things I just was writing about like day 4 was that like this first 30 aren't the best things I made all year. I mean, there's good stuff in there, but like this was just stepping stones. And when I teach these courses to people, I'm always saying, a lot of times I have people do iterative making as part of it. And I'll say, you made 30 things or 100 things in this course of time together. Where was your good stuff? Where was your innovative stuff? And it's never at the first one. It's never the first 10 generally. It's usually about the middle point or 3/4 mark, and then it kind of goes down because it's a up and down sort of thing.
Right.
But the reality is that like they often will be like, okay, so around 20 or 30 or 50 or 60, depending on where we are, how many we're making. That's a lot, and almost nobody does that normally.
Right.
In any work and even personal stuff. Like you don't do 20 iterations of something before you sort of settle on an idea. You go, oh, that was a good idea. Let me run with that, and that's what we do. And maybe, you have 2 ideas or something.
Right.
And that's really important to recognize that like you only get there because you do stuff. And the more stuff you do, the more ideas you have, the more ways of solving problems you have, and the more opportunities you have. And like the stuff that keeps coming back to me because of this project is because I kept putting it out into the world. And even if it wasn't great, and that's a really hard one too for people. Like it's hard for me. It's the worst. Like even now doing Creative Sprint, there are days where I'm like, oh, I have to share this. Okay, I'm gonna put it up online. I'm just gonna brace myself, right?
Right.
You know what happens is like nothing bad. Always people are like, that was amazing. I love that one. You're like, you do? It's terrible. Like
Right.
And so like getting this great perspective and like learning these lessons over and over that I've already learned that I still haven't gotten through my head. And it's I don't know. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I could talk to you forever about this topic of the sort of the technology piece, because I think there's just so many pluses and minuses.
Yes.
It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out like with our children, because like they're just going to be raised on it, and it's going to be very different for them. We all sort of, we all encountered it in our adult lives or, adult lives, and it's different. I mean, I was programming in BASIC in like elementary school.
Right.
Which means like I understand what's underneath all the computers, but most people that don't learn programming or learn, that came up are just like, I don't know, this just is a thing that exists and I don't know how it works. And there's a different mindset, and that's why I'm really excited about like these coding for kids classes where like people need to know how these work. Like Photoshop is one of those things where I took photography classes, so I knew what all those tools were in real life. They're meaningless now, right? Why do you need burn and dodge tools anymore? You can just do whatever. You just darken and lighten or something, it's contrast.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to that. And again, maybe this is the old person talking, because I also, like, when I was in school studying theater design, set design, I learned to draft by hand. And then it shifted to AutoCAD later. And even with graphic design, I learned to do physical mechanicals because my dad was teaching that. By the time I was out of school, it was all on computer. But all of that means that I have a different understanding of like what goes into it and how this stuff works, which means you think differently about how you make things. I don't know where I'm going with this.
No,
but
I think there's something about doing things with your hands, right?
Yes,
And so there's that element. So like
yeah.
I was the same way. So like our friend Ben and I talked about taking photography in high school and literally being in the dark room, burning and dodging, and dealing with exposure times and all that kind of stuff. And and even like, right, the number of people that I could tell you who don't consider, this goes back to kind of people who say they're not creative, right? Which is nonsense. But people that I work with who say, oh, I'm not creative. But then we talk about how folks spend their weekends and they're like working on their house, or they're building a deck, or they're working on cars, right? Now that they may not define that as creative. We may not think of that as creative in a liberal arts sense, but back to that like STEM education idea, it's problem solving, it's manual, it's not necessarily linear, it's trial and error. It's a sense of accomplishment. There's so much commonality there with some of these really tangible, hands-on types of things. I joke with my wife. My wife loves to say that she's not creative, but she is somebody who can walk into your kitchen, go through your fridge and your cupboards, pull out any kind of mix of stuff, and create like an amazing meal that you would have never thought to put together.
Yeah,
she
that's
just
usually
has that
creative.
instinct. Right?
Yeah. No, that's amazing.
Yeah, but she would say, oh, I'm not creative. And I'm like, no, but you are. It just comes out in that way. But it gets back to kind of, as a society, we talk about arts, right? Quote unquote arts in the liberal arts kind of space. And so people think of creativity in that narrow sense. And I find myself saying to a lot of people, I'm like, no, creativity is at its core, it's just the word create. It's just you creating something.
Yeah.
Building something or evolving something, making something that didn't exist before. Whatever that is.
So so two things about that. One is trying to get people in the business world to understand that I'm always saying creative problem solving, and then they kind of get excited again, right? Because you say creativity, they're like, creative problem solving. They're like, oh yeah, I need that. That's the job skill I need. Right. So one is sort of saying, hey, art and creativity. Art doesn't own creativity. Creativity is a separate thing that art sort of manifests in or out of or something.
Right.
But the other piece is that there's a set of skills that artists learn that are actually incredibly valuable, but we've devalued them, especially in America, modern times. And that's the real problem right now, is that you're looking at sort of, I've been saying it is like we're doing this experiment on ourselves right now, right? Like what happens when we take art classes away? Like what happens when we say that's the least important thing, STEM, right? There's no art, right? That's why we're trying to make it STEAM and steamed, and so put it into it again. Because the fact is we're like, hey, this is valueless. This is just peripheral, fluff that you add when you're finally wealthy enough to have a moment to relax and look at art on the wall, right? And this is really dangerous and really problematic. And I frankly think that the problems that we're experiencing now come from that in many ways, because we basically said, hey, this sort of fluff about, because what is it really to make art, to look at the world in a very different way, to make things with your hand, to share things with people, to think about the audience, to like consider other things in more complicated ways, to sort of approach other cultures by thinking about their art. Like this is good stuff that makes you a different kind of person.
Right.
And so to take that away from people and be like, no, that's nonsense, and that's only for those silly liberals or whatever, like to devalue, that's really dangerous. And we're really seeing that outcome in that, the corporations I work with, and these are some really big ones. I work with some Fortune 100 companies, who are saying like, we don't get creative talent from America. We have to get it from other places because the people here aren't being taught to be innovators. They're being taught to just, do business or make money or whatever. But like this real like creative innovation stuff is coming from other places now. And we used to be the hub of this. We're seeing what's happening. And it really incenses me. Have you read Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain?
No, I haven't.
So it's a seminal book about drawing, and this woman's been teaching forever, and the newest edition has a great introduction, worth reading just for that. But if anybody who's listening who's not ever drawn and was like, I wish I could draw, like, get this book, or it's sort of a course in a book, and it's going to be hard to do it on your own, but it's still worth reading because it'll just start helping you think about it. But what she says at the beginning is, first of all, neuroscience is proving like all the stuff that she's always known for a long time and the way she teaches this. But what she's saying is like drawing needs to be taught in school and treated as any other thing like math or science or history because of what it does for our brains, right? Because you don't need to take a math class, especially advanced math, like for any reason, like in real life. Like very few people are going to be mathematicians or use trigonometry again. But what is it good for your brain to do that, right? Or like history, you're not going to memorize all this stuff. Like there's reasons that we do this that's beneficial. And she's saying like the drawing piece, it's like about connecting like what you see and how you interpret it and then how you like reinterpret it to make it come out through your hand, and like all this work that you do does these great neural connections for you that are valuable. And right now and again, it could be quoting someone else but somebody in a conversation I had around this was like, if you taught English the way you teach drawing, right? The way you teach drawing, you would teach English class would be like this. Check out a book and see if you like words. And, if it works for you, that's great. If not, don't worry about it.
Right.
Play with some letters. It's nonsense, right? You'd be like, reading's not for you.
Yeah, right.
Instead of being like, no, this is really important, right? And so we don't have anybody, we have people advocating, but obviously there's sort of like this sort of general consensus around like, that stuff, it's not necessary, And I at least from the corporate folks that I work for that get it, who are like, no, we've got to be competitive. They're like, oh, artists do have something to teach us. And that's really what my company does, is that we come in and say, here's this great set of skills artists all learn.
Yeah.
We don't learn business skills. We need those. But you guys need these skills. And when I'm able to sort of break it down for them and say, look, it's not about being good at art, but it is worth understanding the tools that artists use and that you can apply those tools to work you do, and it will change the way you work. That's valid. That's important.
Yeah. One of the questions that I'd like to ask is around creative success. How do you define that?
Not monetarily. The fact of the matter is like success in general is a really tricky thing, right? Because I think you can always look at somebody else and they've always got more and they always did better and they always got further. Right. And like in the end, like success has to be, are you happy? Do you have joy in your life? And it sounds so, talk about that spiritual piece, like so sort of loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
But like in the end, like what does it matter? Like, frankly, like, life is very short,
right?
Especially in the sort of looking at like the sort of cosmic scale of things. Right. We're just on a blip. And it's like, if you spend your time chasing money, like chasing success in some sort of classical sense, like, so what? Like, right. You can't be starving. Obviously, you've got to get your necessities. We taught our daughter very early that like needs and wants, right? So she's always going, food, water, shelter. Those are the important things. And she'll sort of repeat because we'll say, is this a need or a want? And she's like, I need it. But I feel like that's, we get lost and confused about that. And like, in the end, like creating as many moments of joy and happiness in our short lives is important because there's a lot that's not going to be that way in our lives. And there's whether you're, whatever your belief system is, like, you're going to die. So,
and we're all going out the same way.
It's like, that's going to happen. So what are you going to do the rest of your time? And I think creative people, not creative people, but people who spend their time being creative, people who make art, like, that's creation. The act of creation is an incredible thing, right? You're birthing something, whether it's giving birth to a child or making art, but making something new that's never existed feels good and has the potential to touch people's lives and make them feel good and create a little more joy in the world. And it's all incremental and it's all about tiny grains of sand adding up, but it's that is that thing. And that, to go back to the ScalaDay project, like, a lot of my corporate work, client work, is like long process, take forever, even like, writing a book or something, it's like, it takes forever. And by the time it's done, you're kind of moved on. And then you got to go through an editing process or you've got to get it printed or whatever it is. It takes forever. And that joy is sort of hard to find sometimes. And when you do like little stuff that's just sort of for the sake of making, like Creative Sprint or doing a daily project, you get that every day. And as much as it's a horribly difficult, can be, really intense process, getting something done every day and sharing it with people and having a little bit of positive feedback every day, it's pretty nice. Yeah. It's a pretty amazing. That's the thing we're all looking for, is that little endorphin rush, right? And that's all the like hearts and likes on Facebook and stuff. Right. But when it's for stuff you've made, that's different, you know?
Yeah. Is that what motivates you creatively? Is that desire to share with people? Is that connection?
I think so. I mean, I think there's partial. I think with everybody who's an artist who sort of takes that mantle, I think you make because you have to make and you have no choice.
Right.
I don't think, I think the idea is you'd make even if no one was paying attention.
Right.
But I think the other side is that you do, but also you'd really like it when people like your stuff. Like we're all sort of ego maniacs in that way of like hungry for that sort of like, did you like my thing?
Right.
What'd you think?
Well,
Like,
and we all want to create stuff that's being shared, right? Like we don't want to create things in a vacuum.
yeah. And because I don't think it exists in a vacuum really. I mean, yes,
Right.
we could make in a vacuum, but in the end, like really what you're making is something that's, you're trying to express something within you. And when it's outside of you, it's the ability for someone else to see it that makes it important, right? The ability to see your art and have it sort of have some resonance outside of you, right? Because otherwise it could just be in you. Like, why, I don't know. Like, there's something around that idea that you are sharing it by making it.
Yeah. Well, Noah, this has been awesome. Thank you. I feel like we could chat for hours.
Absolutely.
I will respect your time, but this has been loads of fun. Last thing we like to do is just ask folks kind of how other people can find you. I don't think you're a hard person to find online, but if you want to share any information about the books you're working on or the book that just came out or how folks can find you, that would be great.
Yeah. So noahscalin.com is where my art resides. My company is called Another Limited Rebellion. The website.com, but it's Another Limited Rebellion was my punk rock joke to name a company that, a la Minor Threat.
Right, exactly.
Creative Sprint is the new book. CreativeSprint.co is the website, and that book is out now everywhere. And it's about doing the Creative Sprint. And you can still sign up for free for whatever Creative Sprint public stuff we run through there. I'm at Noah Scalin on pretty much all social media platforms, so I'm easy to find and right now we're in the midst of the Skull-A-Day anniversary, so I'm tweeting a lot of skulls out. So
yeah, congratulations on that.
Skulls.
10 years.
Thank you. Yeah,
Very nice.
Obviously I didn't make them for 10 years, but the fact that like 10 years later this project is still have some resonance is pretty crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Time does fly.
that's awesome. Well, again, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I feel like I learned more from you than I have from probably anyone else that I interviewed. When we set this up, I was like, dude, this is the guy that should be doing this podcast. Not
No. Here's the thing: I'm not podcasting, and it's one of those things where I'd like to one day, but I'm too busy.
I totally get
So
it.
I'm glad people like you are doing it,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed our conversation as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, again, I appreciate it. Enjoy your evening,
Thank you.
and I'll talk to you soon.
Alrighty.
Thanks. All right. A big thank you to Noah Scalin for the interview. Noah, thank you so much. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Now, if you liked the episode, shoot me an email and let me know. And in fact, to show you my appreciation, I'll send a few stickers and buttons as my way of saying thanks. Just remember to include your mailing address in your email to me. You can reach me at headheartandhustle@gmail.com, or you can reach me through our website. You can also get email updates from us, which I'll admit are fairly inconsistent depending on how busy my life gets. Visit headheartandhustle.com/newsletter to sign up for those. Also, remember that you can find us on the web at headheartandhustle.com, and we're also on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, heck, even Google+. You can find us on all those platforms as well as through our website. I also want to mention that our logo was created by Meg Shearer. If you really enjoy the logo, you can find her other work on Society 6 at Meg Stuff. And the music that you hear in each episode was written and performed by my good friends in the band Starch to Sugar. You can find them at starchtossugar.com or on Facebook. Lastly, I'll just put a plug in and say that if you think you might be a good fit for a future episode and are interested in being interviewed, shoot me a note. Again, send me an email at headheartandhustle@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for listening, and go create something.